Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James. Just with me today is Mr. John Cameron. You know, John, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. Jimmy Carter passed away a few days, I guess a couple weeks ago now at this point, by the time the show airs. And, you know, we're having a discussion about it today in the control room. And Jimmy Carter was an honorable man that was in a wrong position. At least as president, right? There's the feeling across the country, and even those of us who vehemently disagreed with his politics, you can look at them as the human being and say he was at least an honorable man. And so that's kind of where we, where we sit at this. There's a lot of emotional outpouring. A lot of people, which some of it I understand. You know, if you've got a house from Habitat Humanities and the ex-president shows up and hits the hammer for your house, that's a huge thing. But so, but at the same time, he was a terrible president, and I don't think we should whitewash that.
No, I don't think we should give him a pass. He did on some things, some deregulation, he did well. But he did something. He destroyed Rhodesia, became Zimbabwe, and I like that. I can stare at myself the whole show. That's really cool. I think you should put one right there too, and over there. Anyway, so he decided to balance the budget by inflating, and if it wasn't for, why am I drawing a blank? On the head of the chair, the head of the Fed, the last honorable Fed chair said, no, you're not doing that. Put the brakes on, tighten up the money supply. We had interest rates at 15%, and people stopped spending money and had to close down businesses and all the rest of that stuff. But inflation came to a screeching halt because he figured, I'll just print money and inflate us out of this deficit. So did that. That was horrible. He destroyed Rhodesia and decided that it was wrong for a white minority to own so much property in Rhodesia, and helped install basically a thug, a communist, a socialist, who proceeded to destroy the country and set off hyperinflation in the country. And it got so bad, because Rhodesia before that, now it's Zimbabwe, when it was Rhodesia, had the highest standard of living in Africa. And then it got hyperinflation, and it cost $1 trillion to buy a loaf of bread. People would pull down telephone wires to strip the copper out to sell them, kind of like they're doing in Sacramento. And on and on and on. But probably the worst thing he did, which was done from, you talked about being a moral man, is he made it illegal for us to reprocess nuclear fuel. And shortly after that, some radical environmentalists came out against nuclear power. There was a little accident where nobody got killed, and then China Syndrome came out. And right at the time, he said, because they were trying to get rid of nuclear proliferation, and he said, oh well, so we want to get rid of nuclear weapons, but if we recycle nuclear waste, which the French have been doing forever, 95% efficient, folks. We don't need all this nuclear waste. We can recycle it all and power the country for the next 110 years. Look it up. That at one small part of the process, it becomes weapons-grade material. So if it ever becomes weapons-grade material, we can't do it. So basically, he's responsible for us not recycling nuclear waste. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And he, after the fact, when he was a private citizen, he meddled. He was a meddler. And he did it from as you talked about, he had a moral compass, and he did it from that. But he was just flat out wrong in so many things.
Yeah, it's
just wrong.
That is the danger of moralism, right? Is because you have the opportunity to be wrong, and when you're wrong, you're catastrophically wrong. And so that's kind of the danger of well, I'm going to use my moral perspective and going to walk around the world and meddle and trying to...
And Iran caused that. Same thing, you know, getting rid of the Shah is a good thing, and now there were no murder bombers until the mullahs took over. You look at the history of quote unquote, don't call them suicide bombers, folks, they're murder bombers.
Yeah.
They just happen to be collateral damage to their own stupidity.
But the local community humanity of Jimmy Carter was...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He had a big heart. He cared. He just...
Sometimes he cared too much. Maybe we'll leave it at that. Sometimes he cared too much. And speaking of caring too much, Mr. Richard Fields is joining us again this week.
I think he cares just the right amount.
Well, let's see how much he cares about how much money people are spending there in the government. Let's see what we got from Mr. Fields today.
Hi, I'm Richard Fields with this week's Report from the Fields. Nothing says that Republicans learned nothing from the November wins like Republican Speaker Mike Johnson pushing through a massive budget reconciliation bill at the end of the year that keeps the government open until March. The bill suspends the debt limit, a Trump demand. It authorizes $110 billion in farm and disaster aid and more submarines for the Navy, money the government doesn't have, which means the cost will be passed on to the public in the form of inflation instead of taxes, amounting to an average of over $320 per person. At 118 pages, it's a marginal improvement over the original Mike Johnson negotiated reconciliation bill, which had more than 1,500 pages of pork, including huge pay raises for Congress critters. Johnson, the Republican Speaker, had to rely on near unanimous Democratic support and the votes of 34 rhinos. And that demonstrates that in spite of the voter message that elected a Republican House, switched the Senate to Republican control, and elected a Republican president, Republicans are still not responding to the desire of voters for less government spending, not the same old pushing the ever-increasing debt can down the road. It's a stark contrast to Argentina, where voters elected a president, Javier Milei, who promised to reduce spending and inflation and then actually did so. In a just world, the costs of disasters will be borne by private insurance paid for by those suffering the losses, not by the taxpayers. Likewise, lobbying groups like Big Ag and the military-industrial complex would not be bailed out whenever they say, please gimme. Unfortunately, passage of the reconciliation bill, which increases spending and cuts nothing when we're already running record red ink under a Republican majority, bodes poorly for any significant change in government overspending. DOGE has its work cut out for it. It doesn't look very optimistic. That's this week's Report from the Fields. I'm Richard Fields. See you again next week.
Yeah, and thank you, Richard. You know, just to let the crew inside know,
even Richard was on a budget.
Yeah, Richard's on the. Just to let the crew know, we're skipping this next topic because I actually put it in twice, just so the crew knows. And thanks, Richard. Government budgets and the way politicians decide to spend money is mind-boggling, right? And it's from a. Actually, we're going to skip a couple topics. The Biden legacy is trillions of dollars in improper payments. And that's just improper payments, John. That's not even talking about the the misspending, right? The crappy spending, the poor spending habits, the wasteful spending. We're just talking about stuff that is clearly improper, where money was gone and given to people who clearly didn't deserve it from the start. Well, based upon their own requirements,
government's own rules. It's frightening, but he's not the. Well, I think the same thing happened during the previous Trump administration as well, because what happens is the government is supposed to, or the president is supposed to be the chief executive, right? That's the title, the chief executive, right, of the country. So if you had, let's say, the CEO of, let's pick a company that's run well. Wait, I got to go down the list. Apple, and they paid their vendors. Let's say they paid the wrong vendors 30% of the time. let's say they allowed people to get inventory from them that didn't have the credit rating they needed to get the inventory. Let's say they, I'm trying to think of other examples, that they ran shoddy merchandise out of a perfectly run factory because nobody was watching what was going on in it, that cost 20% of sales. If it was a CEO of a company that did that, a chief executive, they'd be fired. They would be fired for incompetence and malfeasance. So all of these grab and spend agencies have rules about what they're supposed to do. The Small Business Administration has hard and fast rules about who gets money. They have to qualify, they can't owe taxes, they have to have a recent tax return, they don't have the bankruptcies, they can't owe tax. So 20+% of SBA loans go to people that don't even qualify, right? No wonder half the people that get SBA loans go bankrupt. And the list goes on and on and on and on. It was worse. His administration misspent almost as much in 4 years, but then the guy's senile, whatever you say, as Obama did in 8. And Trump right there behind him because they weren't watching either. And, you know, my question is, okay, if you misspent it, go get it, bring it back and give it back to the taxpayers. But they don't even go get it.
Well, because they probably can't really track it. And that's the real thing, is average people who do qualify those loans get caught up and stuck in the red tape, and they can't actually get through the qualifications. While people who are criminals, we'll just call them criminals, even if they're not technically criminals, we'll call them criminals, can manipulate and use the system, get all this cash and money and walk away scot-free and be perfectly fine. And it's not just, right, we've seen this in the greenwashing, right, where the government gives some alleged environmental company a bunch of money to go off and build something that it never really gets built. And
electric postal, what was that? That one we looked at?
Yeah. Oh, there's all kinds. Yeah. I mean, the environmental side of
no, it's awful. Yeah, it's greenwashing. It's basically laundering money to his friends. You know, like the Soros wind farms that are falling apart and killing whales. It's laundering money. And when the mafia does it, or those poor pot farmers in Humboldt County, if they catch him, they throw him in prison. But when his friends do it, they go, oh man.
They get to go off scot-free.
Yeah, bad business decision.
Yeah. And this does actually bring up a point. You know, the Joe Biden presidency, where it's so obviously decaying, and so it's so obvious that that person is not the person who is watching everything. You know, doesn't it not? It's like a big flashing neon sign. The president has too much power. The president has too much power. The office has too much power.
Why are we mourning a public servant as if they were an emperor of Rome? And pretty soon we're going to mourn this guy because he doesn't have long on this earth. These are public servants that we've hired to take care of us. They're not kings. They're not emperors. They're not empresses, whatever. Yet we allow them to assume massive amounts of power that nowhere in the Constitution of the United States are they given. And then when they travel, when Biden travels, it costs probably $1 million a minute for him to go somewhere. It takes like 4,000 people with him. Emperors of Rome would lust after that kind of pomp and circumstance and power. This is supposed to be a democracy. These people aren't our kings. They're our freaking servants. Where do they get off doing this kind of stuff? And people say, well, we need a strong man as a president. No, we don't.
No. And that's the thing. The political left is sitting here telling us how afraid they are of a Trump presidency. Yeah. And the only reason they're afraid is because the presidency has a lot of power. If the presidency had no power, no one's going to care what Trump is, because he's got no real power.
Yeah.
And so what they're actually afraid of is presidential power. They're not really afraid of Trump. They're afraid of somebody other than them having that much power.
Yeah.
That's the real fear.
They shouldn't have had the power. He shouldn't have the power.
No.
Nobody should have that kind of power. And I was talking to somebody who was about Trump's upcoming quote-unquote deportation of all these people that live here. And I said, it's just hubris. It's like Biden got elected by convincing young fools that got a college degree that he was going to find a way for them not to pay for it. And he knows that legally, every time he tries to do that, other than a few billion here and a few billion there, dollars, not loans, the courts are going to stop him from doing it because it's illegal. It's illegal. You can't just say, oh, you don't owe that, right? You can't do that unless you go through bankruptcy, and bankruptcy won't protect you from student loan debt.
No, I mean, that's the single thing they could do to solve student loan debt is simply let them be written off, let them be dealt with in bankruptcy.
Well, there are ways around it, but I can't, if I were to tell people how to do it on the air, I would be convicted of teaching people how to defraud the government, and I'm not going to do that. You know, because there's so many rules in the
But isn't that thing, isn't just kind of waiting?
He promised to do that. And Trump promised, he's working his base, right? He wants to get people to vote for him. He's going to deport all these people. He knows he can't deport kids who were born here. Like the second or third line in the freaking Constitution defines what a citizen is, and it's natural born. You're born here. You can't get your butt thrown out of this country. And if he tries, the Supreme Court, a circuit judge, the first place it gets sued is going to say, no, I got my copy of the Constitution right here. And it's like, page 1, line 3, natural born, right?
Yeah.
But
well, you know, they're going to start. They'll start with the criminals and the ne'er-do-wells, and they're going to kind of hope that takes long enough.
Yeah.
For
and also people are going to self-deport.
Yes.
Right, and that was the whole idea anyway. He's a salesman and a negotiator. He knows he's not going to put 10 million people on a plane and send them back. The countries he's going to try to send them back to wouldn't take them anyway.
No, he'll do just enough so it looks like he's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what will end up happening.
I'm getting all excited.
But you know, the government is doing another thing. You know, we're talking about giving money to friends of, and this is another thing of giving money to friends of. The Social Security Fairness Act.
It's only $200 billion.
Yeah, well, you know, what's $200 billion among friends, John?
It's only going to bankrupt the Social Security that's going to be bankrupt in
what
2033?
33, something like that?
It's going to be in 2032
instead.
in a couple of months because of giving people away. But have you fly with this one? I've been talking the whole time.
Yeah, so the Social Security Fairness Act. So they're giving $200 billion to government workers who already get a pension. Is essentially what's happening. Just to kind of boil it all away, all the nonsense away. Government workers, they don't pay into Social Security because they get a pension. And so because of that, they don't get Social Security. Unless they've had, right? If you've had jobs outside of the government, you can get Social Security for that.
You get some, and that's the problem. Because what happened when they first did this, when they first arranged for government employees to get pensions instead of, because it happened all the time, folks. It's a relatively recent thing. They started paying them this, because the way Social Security is, if you make very little money and you pay very little Social Security tax, then they look at your income and pay you a higher percentage in Social Security when you retire than they do for rich people who put a lot in it. Because when rich people put a lot in it, they say, oh, you put a lot in it, so the percentage is lower. So even our Congress figured out that that was a boondoggle giveaway, and they rearranged and put a law in place that said you can't double dip. You can't get more out of Social Security in essence than you put in, but everybody does. But and so they snuck this one in. Teachers, government workers, especially federal government workers. If you're a federal government worker, you now can get Social Security and... Well, no, you have to have worked a little bit, but everybody worked at a McDonald's or something like that.
How many people... I mean, I can think of a couple of my family members who have never worked outside of government, but it's only a couple. Yeah. And it's not a large percentage.
No. Everybody works somewhere until they could get on the government dole. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not saying your family doesn't work, but a lot of them don't. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Hey, they're government workers. You know, they are what they are.
It's an oxymoron, isn't it?
What's that?
Government worker.
Well, John, what is it? The 10% do half of the work? Is that what is that the Pareto curve? In any organization, 10% of the people do half.
Well, the 80-20 rule. 20% of people do 80% of the work. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Then again, 20% of the people cause 80% of the problems, and 20% of the people get caught for crime, and on and on and on. Yeah.
Oh, you mentioned crime, John. We're going to move on to our next thing. U.S. newspapers are rewriting history, John, and this one, I
It might
understand.
help me actually, but go ahead.
I understand the concept, but the historian in me,
Yeah.
it finds it disturbing. The U.S. newspapers, they're deleting old crime stories, offering subjects, and it's mostly, petty crimes. People stole a car or they vandalized a statue or something goofy like that. They will go back in history, take them and scrub the names from the stories. Now, it doesn't scrub the physical copies, but it does scrub, when we live in a digital world now, and it does scrub the digital copies, which is what the future is going to see. And so now, if someone comes back and wants to do a historical documentary on a town, and they've had some vandalism of a historical statue, and now you can't find out who and why did that, because the newspapers are going to remove that ability.
So my problem with it is what's going to happen. It starts with this, but then it will become biased by political outlook. And what it's going to do is rewrite history in 20 years from now or so. The riots that almost burned down Minneapolis and other places because of Floyd, that were labeled as peaceful while cities burned, aren't even going to appear anywhere in history. But what's going to happen is January 6th will stay there. So, that's my problem, because, what's a petty crime? What's a serious crime? And, right now, for example, juvenile crimes are legally sealed. If you do a crime as a juvenile, records are sealed, and it doesn't follow you into adulthood. So why do they need to go back and do this? Because we've all done stupid things in our youth. Heck, I did a stupid thing last week I'm not going to talk about. And so who cares if you know that it's out there? I have a problem with it too.
Yeah,
I have a problem with it too.
It seems you can understand, go back to Jimmy Carter, you can understand the emotion to it. You can understand you can understand the desire to say, hey, someone did something stupid. You don't want it to hang up in his life if someone goes Google searches their name while they're looking for a job. But that's part of your character. That's part of your history. You don't get to ignore that.
And the nice thing about it is you say, yeah, I did some stupid things in my youth, and look how much I've turned my life around and what I'm doing now, and you haven't caught me for anything recent. I mean, I haven't done anything recently.
Yeah. You're actually taking part of the human story. And, we read about 1984. It didn't start by changing historical documents. It's right? That's not where that stuff starts. It doesn't start at the end. It starts with the little things. And as we accept the little things, it becomes another one and another one. We know how this works.
That line in the sand getting pushed further and further out.
Because, well, if that's okay, well, this is just a little bit worse. Yeah. It goes from...
And they'll say that this particular demographic was oppressed, and there are reasons for those crimes where we should scrub them all from the archives. And then they'll say these people, anyway, it's gonna become politicized because everything does.
Everything does.
And
eventually.
unfortunately, it's going to take 100 years, if it ever does, for people in journalism to move from the left to normal. I don't think it's going to happen. So they're going to be in charge of that, and that makes my skin crawl.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, John.
Yeah.
So we got 4 minutes left or so.
Tiger Mother?
Tiger Mothers.
This is cool.
So, what is it, 10, 15 years ago, there was this whole big Tiger Mother movement, right?
Yeah.
And let's be clear, if you have the right child, a Tiger Mother is perfect for the right child. And so when you talk about people like J.D. Vance or Vivek Ramaswamy, those are perfect people to have a Tiger Mother. I would have rejected a Tiger Mother, and she would have had the worst time in the world. But for people like that, it works really, really well. And I think we've got the proof is in the pudding, right?
Well, this woman, it goes beyond Tiger Mother. This woman is a brilliant Yale, I think she's a Yale law professor, right? And she came out and said something about accountability years ago, and it was taken, as racist, and they tried to cancel her. And it did horrible things to her life. Basically, her system shut down, and she was in a wheelchair and ill and nearly died because she basically said that people get what they deserve, and they need to get off their dead asses and go work. and crack the whip on them, and they will, and don't give people special treatment because all it does is mollycoddle them, and she went on and on and on, right? So turns out that she has mentored Kasenji Jackson was one of her students, J.D. Vance was one of her students, Vivek Ramaswamy was one of her students, I think. So she doesn't care who you are, she likes people that are authentic. And she's brilliant, and she's admired by everybody who met her, but because she talks about personal accountability, they tried to cancel her, and now she's back. And I'm going to throw this out there. If there's an opening in the Supreme Court, I think she might be put forward for it.
Couldn't be worse than what we've got up there now.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting thing, because we talk about accountability, personal responsibility, versus what has become the social norm the last decade or so is victimization. Viewing yourself as a victim. You are a victim of circumstance, you're a victim of society, you're a victim of history, you're a victim of your gender, you're a victim of your race,
your
you're a victim.
Times, you're where you were born, and to a certain extent this is true.
Yes, and that's the thing.
I have a pretty good life. I was born really poor, and I have a pretty good life. I'm not rich now. I was sort of rich once, but we won't go into that now. So, but what would I have done if I was born to the Darfur? What would I have done if I was born in Cambodia during the killing fields? What would I have done if I was a farmer in the Ukraine when Stalin had the purges? What would I have done if I was in the ghetto in Poland?
Yeah, and that's why it's so attractive, because there is truth to it. But the reality is you could never get out of where you are except by accepting the responsibility of the position you're in and taking the accountability to move forward from it. And that's her message. That was kind of her message, right?
Yeah.
It's not that it's not a Tiger Mom message. It's that, yes, you can be a victim, but no one's going to get you out but you.
Yeah.
And it's just not possible.
Suck it up, bro.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you, John, for being here. Thank you for working hard in there. And thank you for watching. Have a good night. And please remember to love everybody.
Especially those that don't deserve it.